very good afternoon to you and welcome to Opinion 2017. And this day, we are very grateful to host a man whose accolades are global, none other than David Ndii. Now, it's important to note that David Ndii is an economist and is also the chair of the NASA technical team and strategy. David Ndii actually was part of the team that led the economic recovery of Kenya in 2003 in the NAC government. He wrote the economic recovery paper when Professor Peter Anyang' was the Minister for Planning. One of the governments that we can actually be proud of that did something positive for this country. He was also heavily involved in writing chapter 12 of the economy, of the constitution on the economy. So David Ndii, karibu sana.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I'm very grateful. I know you have a very, very hectic schedule, and I really thank you for finding time for us on Opinion 2017. Now, the name David Ndii, I mean, just some 2 months or so back, I mean, it was all over. I mean, some people were calling for your arrest. Some people were calling for your head. Some people were saying, yes, you are our hero because you have said what we regard as taboo, but is in our hearts. And this was about secession. But we will come to that. Let's begin by sessional paper number 10 of 1965, which guided government policy in terms of public investment. How has it affected what other Kenyans feel as marginalization or overinvestment in particular areas and zero investment in other areas?
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes.
And thank you very much for starting with that subject.
Yes.
Because really you are starting with a question, where did the rain start beating us?
Right.
Because we can really say that that's where the rain started beating us.
Yes.
Sessional paper number 10 of 1965 is very instrumental to understanding Kenya.
Yes.
For several reasons. One, it was actually the KANU manifesto. That is the manifesto that KANU used to win. It was a translation of the KANU manifesto from independence into policy. Of course, with changes as you do, like the way NAC had a manifesto. And when the government came into power, Professor Nyong'o asked myself and 2 other people to take the NAC manifesto, take the other policy documents, and translate them into an economic recovery strategy.
Yes.
So that was what sessional paper number 10 was. Now, why do I and other people say that it took us on the wrong course? For 2 reasons.
Yes.
At one point, in fact, okay, let me start with the important point. It said several things. One, that economic growth is the most important priority.
Economic growth
is the most important priority for Kenya.
Right.
To solve all our problems, development, it put material development at the center, and it said that economic growth is the most important thing.
Right.
It then said, its theory of economic growth is that if you want to grow very fast, you must put your investment resources in the places which have got high potential. And in fact, it said, not just places, it said the places with a high potential and the people with the discipline for planned development. No. I am quoting the paper.
Yeah, you may just quote it again for the sake of our viewers. I think that is very, very important, that second bit of the definition.
It said, in the section, you can go to the section is titled, I don't remember what paragraph it is. It is referred to as provincial balance and social inertia.
Provincial balance and social
You can hear the language.
Yes.
So it said, then for you to grow as fast as possible, resources must put where? In the high potential areas, so that which can sort of produce more, and 2, with the people, with the discipline for planned development. So you have high potential places and high potential people, low potential places and low potential people. So once you have characterized people like that,
Yes.
then you can see where the sort of root cause and the of marginalization is in the mindset of people. The other thing it says that you go back to the front and you go to the preface or the introductory part written by then President Jomo Kenyatta. He then says that, advises that all the debate, there had been a lot of debate in the country about what economic policies, whether to be socialist or capitalist and all that kind of thing. He said all those debates must end. We cannot continue something like debating the aims of our society endlessly. Debate must end and go back to work or something like that. So it gives you the mindset of the people who then took over the country. They were intolerant because you have just told people that their places will not be a priority and they will not be a priority and they are supposed to shut up. So they cannot even object and challenge that debate. So what those things add up to? They add up to prioritizing what we call trickle down economic development and putting economic development, which is wrong, which is flawed, and also prioritizing material progress, as you see it, of some people at the expense of political development.
And even social development.
Political, let's start with political, which is critical. Because you are a colony of very diverse people. They were not under the same governance until you became a colony, and the colonizers drew arbitrary borders. So you are not a nation. Okay? You're just people who have been put together and in fact have been governed using divide and rule. But you fail to recognize that your first priority is to build national cohesion, which Nyerere did. So you fail to recognize the importance of bringing these people together and getting over the divide and rule and doing the divide and rule and the negative impact of colonialism and people and exploitation. So you throw away all the independence aspirations of people, and then you prioritize, you then advance an economic agenda, an economic paradigm, which in fact polarizes people even more. You advance a divisive economic agenda. So you don't build the political institutions to bring people together. You suppress, by intent, you suppress debate so that they cannot voice their disagreement and sort of articulate that they disagree. And then you do the divisive thing. And then your own policy assumption that to grow fast, you should invest in the places of high potential is actually wrong as a matter of economic theory and practice. Because, on the contrary, if you want to maximize returns on investment, you invest in the places with less capital, not the places which have already a lot of capital. That is why foreign investors from Europe and America come looking for investment opportunities in emerging markets and others like places which are called below emerging, like ourselves, I forget the terminology, because the returns are higher where there is less capital. So why aren't they investing in Germany, which has got more advanced economic potential and people who are well known to have to be very disciplined in terms of economic whatever. Why do they come looking for investment opportunities in Africa and South Asia and other places? It is because the returns to capital are higher the less capital you have. That's why there's more opportunity. So the economic model was flawed. The priority was bad.
Yes.
The mindset of the leaders was bad and bigoted. And they could only have led the country down towards the path of where we have now arrived.
Wow. You know, listening to you, it means, there are certain stereotypes that even comedians have picked up. There are certain stereotypes about communities. That community X, these are laid-back, lazy persons. Community Y, these are business persons who are very aggressive. Community Z, I'm just beginning to join the dots and seeing that this classification then, these stereotypes were informed by this classification, which has direct links to how economic well-being is today.
Yeah.
You mentioned something about Mwalimu Nyerere. We were told when we were young that Tanzania wako nyuma. Well, it does appear that it is the opposite now in terms of social cohesion.
True.
Wow. Very well. I mean, that was important, especially for a demographic that, say, is between 18, 25, just approaching the 30s. These are things we don't hear in our history classes.
Unfortunately, it is an indictment of our education system.
Right.
It doesn't teach people the right history,
Yes.
and it doesn't frame it in a manner that informs, in a form of social inquiry.
Yes.
To understand your society.
Yes.
It is learned by rote.
Mm-hmm.
It is not critical. There is no critical appreciation.
Yes.
So, which is unfortunate.
Which is unfortunate. Very well. I'll be reading comments. Let me just get a few here. Honorable David, when is countrywide rallies in support of people's assemblies and boycotts beginning? Baba's word is final. This is by Don Robs. Very well. I'm sure. I'm sure
Yeah.
David Ndii will get to that. He's already given you a title, Honorable. Okay. Let's get to the topic that made some people raise hell. I mean about your name. It was all over social media that David Ndii has committed treason. David Ndii should be arrested. He's touching on a topic that is taboo, wants to tear the country down. He's baying for blood cessation. What informed your remarks then?
Actually, you have to go back 3 years ago.
Yes.
3 years ago, I wrote a column which actually informs that debate, and that's the first time I broached this subject.
Right.
The title given to the column was "Kenya is a Cruel Marriage. It's a time to talk divorce." But the underlying theme, I picked up on a statement made a couple of years ago by Professor Bethwell Ogot,
Yes.
a famous historian, probably our most famous historian, when he said that the project Kenya, the Kenya project,
Yes.
is dead. And I started explaining what is the project Kenya project.
Yes.
The Kenya project is, again, for the young people, is a debate which was there in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
And it is what we have just described, the project of unifying these disparate communities into one nation. The mindset that they should become one nation. The Nyerere project.
Yes.
So you can see the Nyerere project for Tanzania,
Right.
the fact that the Kenyan one did not take off, and Bethwell Ogot at some point declared it dead.
Dead.
So I picked on that, and I said, look, if we are now approaching a general election,
Right.
with an electoral commission which is discredited, that was the Hassan Commission, with the Supreme Court after the Mutunga ruling, which was sort of didn't have the credibility to arbitrate this dispute.
Yes.
And you will recall that the lack of credibility of the judiciary is partly what triggered the post-election violence in 2007.
Yes.
And I said, look, my thesis was the following. Look, if we cannot live together,
Yes.
and we are going to fall apart, we might as well do it in an orderly manner. That's why I was talking about divorce. Instead of us having a civil war, and then you end up with the same outcome.
The same outcome. Yeah.
That was my prognosis. I said, look, so I put it out for debate. Say, if we see that instead of going back to the 2007 scenario,
Yes.
and then you have a civil war, and then you fall apart, why don't we start talking about weather it makes sense as a single nation anymore. And that was the first time people said secession. They sort of jumped up and down and all sorts of things. And I also wrote in that article that if Uhuru Kenyatta is declared winner in another sham election, this country will ban. And people took that to mean literally that the country, people will slaughter each other.
Yeah.
What I really meant is that the country will fragment.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to do it by whatever, but its capacity to hold itself together will be severely tested. And that's where we are. Okay? Right. So, when I sort of spoke this recent, and when again the issue was revived, I have made a point of, or let me back up a little.
Yes.
During the constitutional review process in the 90s, yes, we had a debate, and I pointed out that in one of the articles I wrote, whether we should, in writing our new constitution, which we now have, whether we should introduce it in the preamble as we, the people of Kenya, yes, or we, the nations of Kenya.
We, the people of Kenya, or we, the nations
of Kenya. How you frame it, one of those two, is actually very fundamental. If you say we the people, you are saying that we are one nation, one cohesive group of people, yes, and you can actually build a civic nation based on individual liberties, a very Western template, yes, of a nation state. If you start from the premise that we, the nations of Kenya, then you are admitting and acknowledging that our different ethnic groups are actually nations. Luo nation, Kikuyu nation.
They're nations first.
They were nations. They are pre-existing nations. Right. And what you are doing is a federation of nations.
Federation of nations.
So we are negotiating the constitution as nations. We are going back to pre-independence and stopping to pretend that we are one people and saying we are different people, but we are made to be part of this colonial state, and we negotiate as we Maasais want this, and we Kikuyus want this, right, and we Turkanas want this, and we El Molos want this. Right. I always advocated for that model. And I told my people, we pretend that we are one people, and we will always come to grief until we acknowledge that we are a multinational state. Okay? So you can then begin to see there's nothing incendiary about the secession debate. Yes. Because you're saying, it's saying the same thing. It's saying now, given the level of division that we have, and whether we like it or not, what you are seeing is the capture of a state by individuals, but it acquires the character of dominant ethnic groups. Ethnic groups dominating others. That is the character it has acquired. And they have said they will dominate us for another 20 years, having done so for 50 already. I'm a member of one of those ethnic groups, and I say it's wrong. Okay? So part of the backlash is because I am a member of one of those and I'm being disloyal.
The criticism is coming from within.
Yes, I'm saying this is wrong. You cannot have this perception. If you sort of then have a thing which has a semblance of an ethnic supremacist project, right, it has only one end, and that one end is known, and it's tragic end.
Now that you've mentioned that, somebody's asking here, what does Ugamaki mean? It's something that pops up left, right, center. Those of us perhaps who may not belong to the ethnic group that word is indigenous to, do not know. What does it really mean?
You can have different loose translations. Right. I think the closest one is kingdom. I think the political one, which would be more appropriate, yes, is hegemony. Okay? I think it has more, it conveys more a sense of hegemony that, and you hear it among my people, that the narrative out there that we are entitled to power in Kenya for various reasons, because we fought for independence more than other people, because we probably better economic managers than other people.
Right.
It was said recently because the other people don't have a stake in the economy. That's why they are out there destroying things. So there is a language, a hegemonic sort of undertones.
Yes.
And I think that's what people are capturing. Unfortunately, if you look at the events of the last 2 months, they are reinforcing. They are reinforcing that that perception of hegemony.
That type of thinking.
Yeah.
Wow. Very well. Let me just go through 2 or 3 comments. I mean, hundreds and hundreds of comments, Ndii. Gitobu Mwenda, you're saying this, what is happening in Kenya is a scandal already. Kennedy, you're saying Tibin to resist. Thank you very much for resisting. I just hasten to remind you, if you look at your screen, you'll see that you can support NASA TV via Airtel pay bill number 555-155, and the account number, you can put anything. You can put NASA TV, you can put your name, and if you feel like you want to buy me coffee this evening, you can put Baggy there.
Very nice.
Yeah, very well. Let us go to matters economy. Eurobond, amongst other scandals, NYS, the SGR, and many others under the belt of the Jubilee administration. We are being told that the administration is currently wants to float another Eurobond so that they may meet the obligations of the previous Eurobond. It's also understood that the first instance that led to floating the Eurobond was to deal with a syndicated loan of 2014. Let's just have a clip of Uhuru Kenyatta at that time when this whole Eurobond was being floated. And then we
Indeed, very competitive rates that we were able to achieve. Ladies and gentlemen, that cash is now deposited in our Kenyan accounts. The bonds are now also trading at a premium of 102% on the Irish Stock Exchange, signifying further investor confidence in our economy. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Kenyans, I want to assure you that the government will spend this money prudently. This means that both private and public sector corporations have the ability to tap into the international capital markets to fund their business expansion at reasonable cost. By accessing these external funds, we will reduce government borrowing from the domestic markets. Indeed.
Very well. I mean, those are the sentiments of Uhuru Kenyatta at that time, and we seem not to be even able to meet obligations of that loan. Is the government of Kenya broke, and what happened to the first Eurobond?
Okay, let me give you the history of the Eurobond.
Yes.
The first time the Eurobond idea was floated, its purpose was to issue what you call a benchmarking bond, what you call a debut. A debut means it's your first time going to the market for sovereign borrowing.
Right.
Typically, historically, we have borrowed from international development finance institutions and from the domestic market.
Right.
So the idea is that if there is a third market, which you can, and you are now qualifying for because the economy has grown, the markets have also changed, you issue a bond which gives you pricing.
Yes.
It becomes a benchmark. It introduces you into the market, like the way companies do what you call listing by introduction, so that you can get, or even you do a small listing in the stock exchange, so that you can get a valuation of your company. It's a pricing bond, listing sort of thing. You know what's the value of your company and that sort of stuff. Gives you creditworthiness. Yes. The amount mentioned for that purpose was $500 million. And it was also said, it so happened that we already had borrowed an emergency commercial loan, which we normally shouldn't do. In fact, it was the first one for a very long time, worth $600 million. Right. So he said, actually, we can issue, if we issue we can then substitute the commercial syndicated loan, which is more expensive and not a good way to borrow, with a bond. So we would just take the money and pay off the bond. It would be budget neutral. Yeah, no money would come into the country. So that was the logic of a Euro bond to replace the syndicated loan. The syndicated loan is 2 years, the interest is much higher. The market then was very receptive to instruments like from countries like us. So it would have been a 10-year bond, 5, replacing a 2-year loan, a cheaper interest rate. The IMF loved it, everybody loved it.
So the idea economically was good.
At that point.
Okay.
But it so happened that because the market was awash with money,
Yes.
petrodollar plus the loose monetary policy of the West to recover from the financial crisis, there was a lot of money doing what we call hunting for yield.
Yes.
So the financiers kept persuading us, there's a big appetite for your instrument. Why don't you up the ticket from 500 million to 1 billion? And then from 1 billion to 2.
Wow.
So we had no plans for borrowing 2 billion. It's just that the market was willing to lend it to us. We had no need for it. We had no plan for it. It was a huge amount of money for our economy. We normally don't borrow in such ticket items. The previous biggest project we had done was Thika Road, which was only $400 million or thereabouts.
Yes.
So this was 4 or 5 times as much.
Wow.
So we were pushed by the market receptivity of our bond, and we borrowed money we did not need. We had no plan for. And then when we borrowed, they said, oh, the market wants even more. So we opened what we call tap sales. So we said, you can continue lending us until, so that was in June, until the end of the year. They didn't even disclose that they had gone on and opened tap sales and borrowed another $800 million or thereabouts. So instead of borrowing $500 million to offset a bank loan, or $600 million to offset a bank loan, we ended up with almost $3 billion we hadn't planned anything to do with.
In the economy.
Yeah, it is extremely responsible thing to do. Now, but something we could have done, knowing that it is very difficult to absorb that kind of money, and it's not even sensible to spend it all at once. What we could have done is put it in a fund and say this money will now finance our infrastructure plan projects for another 3-4 years, and we will draw down, which is what other countries did. They set up a fund,
yes,
and they put it aside, and you'll be drawing, into the budget, 600, 700 million per year as per project. The next thing we had very shortly is that it's finished. And that's when you saw people like myself begin to ask, how? We do not have the capacity to absorb, because we had 2.8 less the 600 million, which were paid off the commercial loan, the bank loan, that you're talking 2.2 billion. We don't have the capacity to absorb $2.2 billion in a year or even in 2 of money that was not planned for projects. And when you looked into the budget, most of the projects in the budget that we were doing were financed from other sources, which you could see, like World Bank, AFDB, and various people. So people will tell you, but we've done Outer Ring Road. It's funded by AFDB. It's not funded by Eurobond. We've done this. I can show you the funding of all the other projects people claim. We cannot show you a single project funded by Eurobond, earmarked Eurobond funds. So it was thrown into the budget and funded various projects. It is actually physically impossible. If you were to do construction projects, new construction projects of that magnitude in this country in 1 year, we don't have the equipment, we don't have the engineers, we actually don't even have the storage capacity for the diesel you need to run the equipment to do that kind of work. You can't escalate project implementation 5, 6, 7-fold within a year. Yeah, you couldn't.
Then the question is, where did the money go?
We don't know. That's a big mystery. But let me tell you, it's not peculiar. This market borrowing is a new avenue for many developing countries. It always happens. Right. And every so often in history, you have this opening up of capital markets, and a few countries go into the market for the first time, and they do hugely responsible things. Argentina has done it severally, Mexico, all sorts of people, Greece did it recently. As we're speaking, besides our Euro board, there are two other scandals of a similar nature, which have now fully matured out in the open. One is the Malaysia, it's called 1MDB. Same sort of thing. They went into the market, borrowed money, it went into campaign slash funds, all sorts of things. It was stolen by some of the financiers, and it is now an international investigation. The other one is Mozambique. It's called the tuna bonds scandal. Also, some syndicated lending organized by a Swiss investment bank and a Russian investment bank. And again, it has become a major, it has engulfed, and it has literally bankrupted Mozambique. So these things are happening. They are not peculiar to us.
So now, as a citizen, if then the government wants to get another Eurobond in order to meet its obligations of the previous one, I mean, what conclusion does that drive me to?
Let me clarify. To be fair, when you then start borrowing in the market, the advantage of borrowing from the market is you often don't have to pay the principal. If you borrow from a bank, you pay both interest and principal. Right. But borrowing from the international market is the same way as borrowing from the domestic bond and bill market.
Yes.
So once you go into the market, the sensible thing to do is to refinance. When it's maturing, you refinance, and so that you're only paying interest. So once you go into the market, going back to refinance your debt is not a problem, as long as you borrowed responsibly. Two, the thing you have, the thing you run is called refinancing risk.
Yes.
That at the time you are going to refinance, the market may not be as receptive as it was when you went there the first time.
You went there the first time, yes.
So that is the problem we are suffering from. We went, borrowed irresponsibly, our creditworthiness has plummeted,
yes,
both for economic, financial, and political reasons. So we do not know how receptive the market will be when we go there. Now, the reason why we are desperate to do it is that, in fact, the plan was to do it this year. But because we did not do it for whatever reason the Treasury has not been able to explain, one of the consequences is that one of the syndicated loans that was falling due in October, that they expected to pay off by going to the market, they were not able to do so. And they have had to reschedule, to negotiate with the creditors. And that is called a default. It's a default event. So our creditworthiness took another nosedive because of that rescheduling event. Because the bank, it was due, you were not able to pay because you had planned to go to the market. So it was a victim of refinancing risk, not being able to go to the market when you need to, because when you become a market borrower, you must have a lot of political and economic discipline.
To stick to the strict
to stick to the straight and narrow, so that you can have good credit. It's just like an individual. If you have a credit card, you must then acquire financial discipline. Otherwise, you will fall into problems very quickly. If you are a new credit card user and you do not use it responsibly, it will get you into trouble.
Oh, very well. We're just about to wrap up. Let me just do two comments, then we'll come to your closing remarks. Adala Jr. Ndii is a great guy. I really like his liberal mindset. We will fight through this together. Regan, you're saying, Ndii, you're a lovely patriotic Kenyan. Kenya needs to understand why they're in Kenya, and most Kenyans need proper education. Very well. Just to wrap up, two things. One, Do you fear for your life? Because, I mean, you're basically going against the grain in a regime that has demonstrated severally that it can be merciless, especially with people that it cannot compete with intellectually. We have seen Sando, we saw Jacob Juma. Do you fear for your life at any point? And lastly, is there any hope for NASA faithfuls out of this quagmire? I know you may not be perhaps in a position to give a way forward. I know you're not a NASA principal, but a lot of people are asking, is there hope out of this? Is the fight still on, and can we win?
Okay, let me be quite straightforward with the two questions. One, I have that conversation with my mother all the time.
Yes.
About personal safety. And I point out several things, in fact, including last week.
Right.
And unfortunately, I had to point out to my mother, you know, people keep telling us and fearing for people like me.
Yes.
And what I see on the other side is people dying, all sorts of people, or from our side, dying in various sort of causes. My friend Kakuru.
Yes.
He was pro-government. He met an accident. Kaiseri. He was threatening us. He went before us. Yeah?
Right.
So this is my point. You will die when your day comes. Not a day before. Not a day later. Now, if your day has come, it doesn't matter what side of the political divide or what your persuasions are or are not, you will not be able to stop it. No one will protect you from it. So I will die when my day comes. Okay? I cannot live in fear and allow myself to be intimidated. Because for me, the freedom, I cannot live, I cannot accept that another human being abusing authority which is used to protect citizens, we've given that authority to him. I cannot accept that I become a victim of fear of another human being. Like that I will not accept. It is actually not within my constitution, physical constitution as a human being, to accept to be intimidated and to fear another human being. Yeah? So that, and I think that is the principle to live by. Because what do you gain by fear? Why is that person? Why should they not fear you? Why should you fear them? Yeah? So that's the principle to live by. You agree to live by fear, you are allowing another human being to become a god. Yeah? I will not allow another human being to become a god. Yeah? They are mere mortals like me. Okay?
Yes.
Which brings me to the next question. Is there hope for NASA?
Yes.
All dictatorships end in failure. Okay? So even these people who are trying to establish a dictatorship, their fate is failure. It's a matter of when, not whether. So,
it's a matter of when,
not whether.
Okay.
Now, if we refuse to succumb, and we have said it so many times, and I will repeat it, and we said it from the outset after the 8th election, that this country is now divided into two groups of people. Those who are willing to accept a dictatorship as a fait accompli and put their head beneath the parapet, yeah? And those of us who refuse to accept that after 25 years, yeah, of fighting and sacrificing and doing all the things we have done, people like myself and, sort of together. And, when Raila and Banyang and all these people were called the Young Turks,
yes,
we were the youth wingers, the intellectual youth wingers of the Young Turks. So I've been in this all my adult life. And I'm not going to sit by and say, what I have done most of my adult life, at the expense of, could have joined the system and become rich. I could have stayed abroad and become a famous professor. I could have joined Wall Street and become a rich investment banker. I had all those opportunities. I chose to do something I believe in for the future generations of Kenya. I'm not going to give it up because some political thugs can ride roughshod over the country and take over institutions and run away and sort of extinguish the dreams of millions of people. That is something that we should just, by refusing to accept, we have won. Because the dictatorship will end in failure.
Wow. Well, Zach, you're saying, hey, we need this TV to broadcast 24 hours with programs and learning people like David Ndii to educate people. Well, you can support NASA TV to make sure that that dream is a reality by sending your contributions to Airtel Money pay bill number 555155. You can put any number or name in the account number, and if you feel like you want to buy me coffee or David Ndii this evening, you can write D or write Baggy. I leave you with a word from the Holy Bible, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 23. And it says, God bought you for a huge price, so do not be slaves of human beings. Thank you for watching Opinion 2017, and goodbye. Wow, that was powerful.
Okay.